But, the older guys, Ken and Mike, said, no, we got to see if we can help him. I mean, what if we're too late by going back to town first? So when Mike said, okay, the truck's going back, and anybody who really doesn't want to go can wait here, nobody volunteered to stand alone outside the truck. Of course not. But in the movie, they had everybody getting out but Mike so they could preserve the murder mystery. What really happened when he went back? But they all went back. And I give those guys credit for that. That took a lot of courage, They were trying to do a rescue. There was no other reason to go back. It certainly wasn't curiosity. So they went back, and this is what the craft looked like, when I was up under it, looking upward. And the glow of it just, made a really strange look around. The light had just a weird sort of effect. But one comment they made later was that it seemed like something's about to happen. And I'm thinking now that there may have been a reason for that, not just the dangerousness of what I was doing, but they may have been sensing the buildup of some kind of an electrical or energy charge, because I'm thinking that when I stood up, at that point, my head and chest were closest to the craft that they were at any other point. Plus, the increase in sound and the volume and the motion, suggests to me that it was getting ready to take off. And that extra energy output built up some kind of a field. So it wasn't like they were somehow inducing me to come close and then zap me and take me that way. I'm thinking more now, if there's a remake, I would like to, add the perspective that, I'm the one that caused this. I'm the one that took this reckless step of approaching this thing. And then when I closed the distance, this energy jumped through me to the ground and caused severe harm. I may have been, in a near-death situation. And so that's the new perspective I would like to take with the movie, that if there is a remake someday, that it was actually, like I've accepted the term abduction, because, that's what people call these things. But it's more like an ambulance call, more of a rescue mission, really. I made something bad happen, and they were in a position to make it right. If they'd left me laying there, perhaps in cardiac arrest, the best case scenario for the crew would be to pick me up and take me to a Payson Hospital or the Shola Hospital, which would have been over an hour and way too late. If a person's in cardiac arrest, you've got 4 to 6 minutes before brain death begins. And so that's probably the reason I'm thinking now that I was returned. Taken. And the fact that I was returned at all, again, suggests, a less than malevolent motive on their part. I wasn't just dropped back in the woods where it happened, which I would have froze to death before I could get help. I was put back near town where I could get help. And Heber is not where I live, but it was the town nearest where it happened. And also, Heber is down in a canyon, a deep canyon, and there's some steep-sided rock walls out of there. So they were able to descend and deposit me on the edge of town where I could see, to go to where to go to get help. And yet they would not be visible from a distance at all. Whereas if I had been taken to Snowflake, which was in a big, wide valley, if they had lowered and come down there, they would have been seen by hundreds of people, So that explains that to me. But the fact that I was returned whole and healthy, all of these things combined to make me think that, and this is, years of puzzling over what happened and why, and, I've only got myself to blame. But now, but I digress. The movie, really missed an opportunity. You know how Hollywood loves special effects. when they showed the beam coming on, it looks more like of a spotlight, and it just sort of picks the actor up and tosses him back. But what the crew described was much more violent than that. A great opportunity for some special effects to when the more accurate version is ever made. And so the crew proceeded into town. They called the law enforcement. And when the sheriff and his men interviewed the men, they could tell something really terrible had happened. You know, when the crew had gone back to see if they could rescue me, they were unable to find me. They did see the craft leaving, and they described all this to the sheriff. You know, at one point, Mike, fell to his knees and was crying, and he's not ashamed to admit that. You know, I'm not ashamed to admit how totally terrified I was. And Steve Pierce was still crying when they made it to the sheriff. So the sheriff and his men knew that something really terrible had happened, but they immediately became suspicious that there had been a fight and that I had been murdered, and so that they had just made up this cover story and to explain for why I wasn't ever going to be seen again. But Steve has always been very, very upset that I reported that he was still crying when they went to the sheriff. And he was only 17, you know, and it's no reflection on him or how tough he is or anything, but he's really had issues with that. He's, to the point of denying that it happened. Right after my first book came out, he came over to my house and he wanted to fight about it. And so to this day, he tries to minimize how frightened he was. He denies that, he was yelling for the boss to take off, and now he's trying to deny that he was crying. But I'll take the sheriff's men's word for it, and the rest of the crew, that, they were in a very traumatized state. But the sheriff and his men suspected him of murder, and this pressure on the men continued throughout the search. Now, in the movie, they didn't go back that night, but in reality, half the crew did go back with the sheriff and his men. And so that, again, I give those guys credit for doing that, because, they didn't know what they were up against and what they might run into. And, the fact that the sheriff's men were armed was not that much help, This was a very powerful thing. And so they went back and were unable to find anything that night. But there was a massive manhunt. The sheriff organized a search, over 50 men on horseback, on foot, four-wheel drives. They had airplanes crisscrossing the area, helicopters, tracking dogs. It was pretty extensive, and they were unable to find anything. The tracking dogs were unable to find any scent outside the clearing. It just went from the edge of the road where I got out of the truck up to, where I fell. And so, some of the horses, they said, had behaved very strangely and bolted. So there was a lot of pressure in the community to try to explain it away. And so, I think a lot of the locals were only too eager to believe that, this is murder or something else, some kind of hallucination. So a lot of those stories were floating around, and the men were dealing with a lot of skepticism and the constant accusation that they had killed me. During the search, John Gillette was saying that the sheriff sent a deputy with each of the crewmen who just continually pushed at him all day. Come on, tell us what really happened. Who did this? They were kind of pointing the finger at Alan Dallas. He was the black sheep of the crew, had trouble with the law in the past, and so, they were thinking that, and I'd also had, kind of a little mock fight with Alan. We'd had a little dispute, and, but, Alan was kind of a hothead. He'd come to blows with probably everybody on the crew, or nearly so, and so he was kind of the prime suspect. And so when the sheriff brought in the state police lie detector expert, Alan was the one that was graded as inconclusive, but I got a hold of one of the reports from the police file years later, and in it said that Alan had basically told the truth. Now, with a polygraph test, you don't just go through the questions one time. they go through the exact same questions in the same order 3 or 4 times, so that if there's any kind of a reaction in there somewhere, they can exclude that as being some sort of a random thought passing through your head or something like that. If they get the same kind of intense reaction on all 3 or 4 points, that is significant that you're reacting to that one question. Well, he only went through the questions twice before he got in an argument with the examiner and cussed him out and stomped out. So that was the reason he was given an inconclusive, but why the police were basically given the conclusion privately that he'd told the truth. But all that was resolved by Alan being retested by the same examiner years later with better equipment, more modern methods, and the examiner, of course, having much more experience, and Alan and Mike passed again with flying colors, and I took a test from him. You know, at the time that the crew passed the lie detector test, the president of the American Polygraph Association said that the odds were over 1,000,000 to 1 that there could be that many tests on a single issue and there being any kind of an error. Because, you know, everybody knows polygraphs isn't 100%, but when you have that many people, 6 people on a single issue, the odds were 1,000,000 to 1. Well, now there's over 16 tests passed in connection with this incident, so I don't know what the calculation on the odds of a mistake being, but, you know, I've passed 5 different tests from 3 different examiners, and the last one being just a couple of years ago, the last 2. But in the aftermath, even after the polygraph test, they just switched to other sorts of attacks, but I'll get to that as we go along here. After I was hit, I regained consciousness pretty slowly. I was in and out for a while. And I didn't know where I was at first. I was disoriented, in a lot of pain. And I didn't know where I was. I thought, and then I remembered approaching the object, and I thought, well, you know, the crew probably, you know, I was hurt, and they took me in to get medical attention. I thought I was in some kind of a hospital. I was on some kind of an operating table or raised gurney. There was a light above me, and but, you know, because of the pain and the difficulty in breathing that I was having, I didn't want to move too much. I had this thing over my chest, and I didn't want to make it worse, and it did hurt more to move. So I was trying to hold still, but I could hear the sounds of movement around me, and my vision was really blurry, and it was even double vision for a while. But, you know, I came to, got a little more clear as time went on. Like I said, in and out of consciousness. It's kind of like the pain itself would knock me out, but also the struggling to breathe. And one dispute that I got in with our chief debunker was he made this $1,000 bet that I had said I had been bleeding heavily, although there was no evidence of blood on my clothing. I said I was breathing heavily. And so he didn't pay off on the $1,000 bet like he did Stan Friedman. He made a bet and had to pay up. But anyway, that was the key source of my panic, is not being able to breathe, because, you know, when I could finally focus my eyes and I saw these creatures standing over me, I knew I was in no hospital. And so, you know, I just was instantly totally hysterical. And, of course, this shot of adrenaline just gave me extra strength, and I rolled away from them, and this device that they had across my chest fell off, and I staggered back, and they were like coming around towards me immediately, which added to the panic. You know, it's dimly lit. I'm struggling to breathe. It's claustrophobic, low ceiling, very small. And I staggered back, and I bumped up against a shelf, a little bench there. And I turned to look, and there was these instruments scattered out there. And so I just grabbed the biggest thing and started flailing at them. And so they stopped, suddenly turned, and I'm going to move along kind of quickly here because we're running short of time. Okay, thank you. And so I went looking for a way out, and came to a room where there was some apparently doors, which I tried to open, operating some controls on the chair there.